I walked down the aisle to the sound of applause, but all I could feel was a strange stillness inside me. Everything around me looked perfect. The flowers, the polished smiles, the music timed just right. People were snapping photos like we were some kind of royal couple, and I played along, smiling like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But deep inside, something tugged at me. Not panic, just a quiet voice asking, "Are you sure this is what you wanted?" Thomas stood at the altar, looking every bit the charming husband. He smiled, kissed my hand, said the right words, but his eyes were scanning the room more than they were seeing me. I told myself he was just tired. We'd barely slept in the chaos leading up to the wedding. That's normal, right? Everyone says weddings are stressful, so I brushed it off. I forced myself to believe that this was just nerves, not doubt. Not regret, just the weight of the moment. Later during the reception, I watched him from a distance. He looked happy enough, polite, attentive, engaging. Everything you'd expect from the perfect groom. But even in the crowd, I'd never felt more alone. It hit me like cold water down my spine. This day, this marriage, this us. It looked like love, but it didn't feel like love. It felt like a performance I had agreed to star in. And I didn't know my lines anymore. There was a moment during the speeches when someone said we were the perfect match. I raised my glass and smiled, but my throat tightened. What does perfect even mean? Perfect on paper, maybe. We didn't fight. We got along. We shared a calendar and a color scheme, but deep down, I knew. I had always known. Love isn't silence dressed up as stability. It isn't comfort that leaves you cold. It's not this hollow applause echoing through a ballroom where I barely recognize myself. I remembered the nights before the wedding, how quiet he became, how he'd retreat into his phone or claim he needed sleep early. I told myself it was stress, not disinterest, that he loved me in his own way, reserved, contained, adult. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Because if I didn't, then what was I doing in this dress, in this moment, pledging forever to someone who never really saw me? I wasn't ready to answer that question. Not yet. Still, I smiled for the cameras. I hugged relatives I barely knew. I danced with people who would forget the playlist by morning. But inside, a part of me had started to drift, like I was watching it all from behind glass. And Thomas? He never noticed, or maybe he did and just didn't care. That realization didn't hurt yet. Not fully. It just settled over me like fog, quietly stealing the color from everything around me. At one point, I stepped away to breathe. Just a few seconds alone, by the window, away from the flashbulbs and curated joy. The fabric of my dress felt tighter than it had all day, like it was trying to hold something in, something I couldn't name yet. I looked out over the garden and tried to remember why I had said yes. Not to the dress, not to the event, to him, to us. But the reasons I once clung to felt small now, practical, predictable, convenient. People kept calling it the happiest day of my life. And maybe, for a version of me that used to dream in neat lines and Pinterest boards, it could have been. But in that moment, I knew the truth. This wasn't happiness. It was endurance. It was grace under pressure. It was me, performing a role I had convinced myself I wanted. And the worst part? I was good at it. Too good. No one noticed the crack beneath the polish. Not even Thomas. When I turned back toward the room, fixing my veil and steadying my smile, I told myself to focus on the good. The friends who showed up, the family who flew in, the cake, the flowers, the sparkle. But beneath it all, something in me had shifted. I had walked into this marriage thinking I was stepping into peace. I didn't realize until that exact moment, I had stepped into performance. The music was loud, the kind of upbeat that begs you to keep smiling, keep clapping, keep pretending. I needed a break. Just a moment to breathe without the eyes, the cameras, the expectation. So I slipped away behind one of the stone columns near the dance floor. No one noticed. They rarely do when you're not the center of the show. That's when I heard it. His voice. Thomas. Low, casual, like a man with nothing to hide, talking to a friend I barely recognized. "Look," he said, "I married her because it made sense. She's stable, loyal, convenient." That word, convenient, it knocked the air out of me. Like the floor had tilted just slightly, enough to make me grab the column for balance. He wasn't joking. His tone wasn't bitter or angry. It was matter of fact. I wasn't a person. I was a solution, a safe bet, a well-timed checkmark on a life plan. And he was proud of it. That's what hit the hardest. He really believed I'd never hear it. I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't confront him, just stood there in silence, trying to understand how a sentence could change everything. I'd spent so long doubting my instincts, thinking maybe I was just being too sensitive, that maybe he loved differently. But no, he said it plainly. I was convenient. That was it. Not beautiful, not irreplaceable, just convenient. I didn't know how long I stood there. A minute? Maybe 2? Everything felt slow, like the world had gone underwater and I was the only one who realized we couldn't breathe down here. I kept staring at the floor, at the hem of my dress brushing against the stone. It suddenly felt ridiculous. The dress, the vows, the entire evening. I had just promised forever to someone who saw me as a strategic choice, like I was a good deal he couldn't pass up. But I didn't fall apart. Not yet. I pulled myself up, fixed my expression, and walked right back into that reception, smiling, laughing, thanking people for coming. I posed for more pictures, made a toast, even kissed him on the cheek when someone yelled, "One more for the camera." It was surreal how easily I slipped back into character, like my heart hadn't just cracked wide open behind that column, like I hadn't just heard my entire marriage summed up in a single, soulless sentence. People often say betrayal feels like a stab, but this was colder, cleaner, like being filed away into a folder labeled useful. He didn't cheat on me, not in the way people expect. But what he did was worse. He erased me, reduced me to a role. I wasn't his partner. I was his convenience. And now that I had heard the truth, I couldn't unhear it. That night, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. The exact tone of his voice, the way he laughed after saying it, as if marrying me was some clever move. And the silence from his friend, who didn't challenge a word. That was its own kind of betrayal. I wasn't angry yet. Not in the way people imagine rage. No yelling, no smashed glasses. What I felt was colder, sharper. A shift. Like something inside me had clicked into place and said, enough. I thought about confronting him. Right there, in front of everyone. Making a scene. Demanding answers. But something in me refused to give him that satisfaction. Why give him more power, more attention, more drama to brush off? No. I chose something else. I chose control. I chose patience. I walked back into that ballroom, chin high, and smiled for the 100th picture that night. I let him believe I hadn't heard a thing, that he still held the script, that the show was still his. But the truth is, I had just become the writer. The moment he said those words, he handed me the pen. He thought he was in control of the narrative. He didn't realize I had just started rewriting it. I didn't speak to him about it, not the next day, not the one after. He didn't notice the change, or maybe he did and assumed it was just post-wedding exhaustion. I played the part flawlessly. Breakfast together, casual smiles, small talk. But inside, I was peeling back every layer of our relationship, every quiet evening where I felt something missing, every compliment that felt rehearsed, every kiss that never quite reached his eyes. Suddenly, it all made sense in a way I had never wanted it to. I spent those days remembering the way I used to make excuses for him. He's just not expressive. He shows love differently. He's under pressure at work. I wore those excuses like armor, convincing myself that love doesn't always look the way you expect. But now I saw it clearly. This wasn't a love story. It was a contract, a mutual agreement dressed in silk and smiles. He didn't fall in love with me. He chose what I represented: loyalty, stability. A clean chapter in a neatly outlined life. And what about me? What had I chosen? I thought I was building something safe, something lasting. I thought I was being wise. But really, I had settled. I had romanticized reliability, and I had silenced every instinct that tried to warn me. Until now, until his own voice snapped me awake. I wasn't broken. I was done pretending. And that's when the idea came to me. Quiet, but undeniable. I wasn't going to scream or beg or argue. I was going to document the truth. I pulled out my phone one afternoon while he was in the shower. I opened the camera, not to cry or vent, but to speak, clearly, calmly. I didn't even press record yet. I just stared at my reflection on the screen and whispered the words I wish I had heard from him. You deserved more, and you know it. I said it to myself, and it felt strange at first, like talking to a ghost version of me, the one who kept smiling through silence. But something about it felt right. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay next to him, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. So peaceful, so unaware. And I thought, he doesn't even know I'm gone, because I was. Emotionally, mentally, I had already packed my bags. What he held beside him was just the shell I wore. And in that stillness, I knew this wasn't a moment for destruction. It was a moment for clarity. I didn't need chaos. I needed truth. Elegant. Undeniable. So I started writing. Just thoughts at first, sentences that came out of nowhere while making coffee or folding laundry. Honest words, real ones. I didn't know what it would become. I just knew I needed to say them. Out loud, eventually. Not for him, not even for closure, but for me. For the version of me that had stayed silent too long. The version that now deserved to be heard. The first time I actually hit record, I didn't plan it. I had just finished getting dressed, not for anything special, just a simple blouse and jeans, but I looked in the mirror and saw something new in my own eyes. Steady, certain. So I sat down, opened the camera, and spoke. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just with clarity. I talked about love that feels like settling, about smiles that hide disappointment, about how easy it is to disappear in a relationship where you're only valued for your predictability. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. It wasn't about him, really. It was about what I had allowed, about the way I had slowly dimmed myself to fit into the space he offered me, and how, finally, I wasn't willing to shrink anymore. I watched the video once, just once, and saved it to my phone. No editing, no filters, just the truth, clean and unshaken. It wasn't meant to be revenge. It was meant to be a mirror. One I had refused to hold up until now. The funny thing is, he still didn't notice. Days passed. He kissed me goodbye before work, asked what I wanted for dinner. Meanwhile, I was scripting a goodbye of my own, not in whispers or fights, but in words, in calm, deliberate truth. He married me for convenience, but I was going to leave him for clarity. It was 3 days after the wedding when I knew the video wasn't just something for myself anymore. It needed to be seen, not for drama, not for attention, but because so many women stay quiet. Smile through humiliation. Swallow betrayal in the name of grace. I didn't want to be another silent example. So I pulled out the dress. Yes, that dress. The one I wore when I still believed his promises. I put it on, zipped it slowly, and stood in front of my phone like it was an audience I finally trusted. The house was quiet. He was out, probably grabbing coffee or running an errand that gave him an excuse to breathe away from me. I didn't care. I pressed record and looked directly into the lens. No script, no makeup artist, no dramatic music. Just me, in white, steady as ever. And then I said it. I heard you say you married me for convenience. That's okay. I did too. I smiled. Not bitterly. Not smug. Just with peace. Because the truth had finally landed, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I kept going. Convenient to learn my worth. Convenient to outgrow you. Convenient to walk away without guilt. Each word came from a place deeper than anger, a place of knowing, of being done explaining, defending, over-functioning. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for sympathy. I spoke for the woman I had been before all this, and for the women still stuck in stories that don't honor them. I hit upload, then I went to make tea. I didn't expect the response. Not like that. I thought maybe a few friends would watch it. Maybe someone would send a private message saying, "You're so brave." But within an hour, the views started climbing. Shares, comments, thousands of them. Strangers writing things like, "This gave me the courage to leave," or, "You said everything I couldn't." I sat there in silence, my phone buzzing over and over, watching something I made from pain turn into something bigger than me. Then came the articles. the stitched-together clips, people calling it the most graceful divorce announcement ever. And you know what? I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt like my voice had weight, not because I screamed, but because I told the truth without flinching. No theatrics, no blame game, just facts dressed in satin and honesty. It wasn't about shaming him, it was about reclaiming me. Thomas didn't say much at first. He was blindsided, caught completely off guard by a version of me he didn't know existed. I saw it in the way he looked at me that evening, not angry, not embarrassed, just confused. Like he was trying to figure out when I'd stopped being the version of me he could predict, and that's when it hit me. He'd never truly known me. Not once. Over the next few days, I received messages from women I'd never met. Lawyers, mothers, artists, retirees. Some had been married for decades, others were still engaged. They all said the same thing. Thank you for saying it out loud. And every time I read those words, I felt lighter. Not because I'd gone viral, but because I had helped name something so many of us carry in silence, the weight of being chosen for convenience, not for who we really are. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thomas had always loved control, of plans, of impressions, of narratives. But he hadn't seen this coming. He thought I would fold, smile through it, pretend everything was fine. Instead, I stood up in the very gown he thought symbolized submission. And I told the world the truth. That I had outgrown him. That silence was no longer my currency. That clarity, no matter how quiet, echoes louder than rage. And here's the beautiful part. I didn't feel the need to explain myself to him, or anyone. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation or a staged exit. I just needed truth, and a platform. And now I had both. He tried to take control back, of course. That's what people like Thomas do. He started with the usual tactics. Soft denial, casual deflection. Told a few friends the video was taken out of context. That I was being dramatic. That it was just a moment of frustration overheard by accident. But by then, it didn't matter. The narrative had already shifted. People had heard me. And not just my words, but my intention. Calm, measured, unapologetically clear. And something strange happened next. Women, and even some men, began sharing their own stories. In the comment section. In videos of their own. I wasn't the only one who had been quietly categorized, dismissed, used for convenience, and expected to smile through it. My story opened a door, and people walked through it with their own truths. I hadn't set out to start a conversation. But it started, and it grew louder every hour. Suddenly, his version of events didn't just seem weak. It felt irrelevant. Thomas, always composed, always careful, began to fray. Not in public. No, he wouldn't dare. But behind the scenes, his messages changed tone. Less confident, more pleading. Can we talk? Let's not let this get ugly. The irony made me laugh, because the ugly part already happened. He just never imagined I'd give it a voice. He thought I'd stay quiet, stay small. He thought I'd stay. I didn't answer his messages, not out of cruelty. I simply had nothing left to explain. I had already said what mattered. And for once, I let my silence speak for me. Days after the video, I filed for annulment. No press release, no dramatic announcement, just paperwork, clear and final, clean. It felt less like an ending and more like coming up for air, like waking from a dream where I'd been trying to smile with a mouthful of pins. I moved out that same week. No yelling, no slamming doors. I packed my things while he was at work and left the key on the counter with a short note that simply read, "You don't need to understand this now. You just need to respect that it's happening." I don't know if he ever cried. I don't think he knows how. But I do know he underestimated me. He mistook stillness for weakness, loyalty for blindness, love for silence. And that mistake cost him everything. Not long after, I got a call from a women's leadership group. They had seen the video and wanted to invite me to speak about self-worth, about emotional clarity, about walking away without apology. At first, I hesitated. Who was I to speak about anything? But then I realized I wasn't speaking for anyone. I was just offering what I'd learned, that peace isn't found in pleasing others. It's found in honoring yourself, especially when no one else does. Standing on that stage weeks later, Looking out at a sea of women, some young, some older, all of them listening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Wholeness. Not pride, not vindication. Just a deep, grounded sense that I had finally come home to myself. I told them the story, not as a victim or a heroine, but as a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for needing more than to be tolerated. I spoke softly, but with weight. Because I wasn't asking to be heard anymore. I expected it. After the talk, one woman came up to me in tears and said, "You helped me name something I couldn't name for 10 years. I hugged her tightly. Not because I had all the answers, but because I knew exactly what it felt like to live in a story written by someone else, and the relief of finally putting down the pen they handed you and picking up your own. That's what this was. My rewrite. My truth. My freedom. He once thought I'd stay because it was easier, that I'd nod and smile through a life built on convenience. But I didn't. I walked, not out of rage or revenge. I walked because my silence no longer served me. He thought I'd stay out of convenience, but I left out of conviction.